Are payday lenders harmful to the economy? I'm Denisha Richard, and this is Scholars Mate. Welcome to Scholars Mate. I'm your host, Denisha Richard. Payday lenders are not held in very high esteem in most of America. Their business practices have been targeted by policymakers and regulators, but some argue that these lenders play an important role in the economy. So, are payday lenders heroes or villains? Joining us to discuss the issue is Thaya Brook Knight, Associate Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. Before joining Cato, she co-founded and served as the General Counsel of CrowdCheck, a company providing due diligence and disclosure services in the online investing market. Following the recent financial crisis, she served as investigative counsel for the Congressional Oversight Panel charged with overseeing the expenditure of Troubled Asset Relief Program funds. She also spent several years with the Washington office of law firm WilmerHale, where her practice focused on security litigations, securities enforcement defense, and corporate investigations. And also joining us is Joe Valenti, Director of Consumer Finance at the Center for American Progress. He was formerly a Hamilton Fellow at the U.S. Treasury Department, serving as a research analyst working with the Community Development Financial Institutions and New Markets Tax Credit Programs. He previously served as a senior analyst at the New York City Office of Financial Empowerment and as an associate at the Aspen Institute's Initiative on Financial Security. He also interned for the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs under Chairman Christopher Dodd. Thank you for both joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And so, Thaya, why are payday lenders important to the economy?
Well, I think when you have a product like this that on its face looks like something you might not want to use yourself, you have to ask the question, why would people choose to use this product? And when you have that question, you have to look at what are their alternatives. So the people who use payday loans, and it's actually a large segment of the US population, are often people who don't have a lot of other options. So it's somebody who may have had some problems with credit in the past, so they don't have access to credit cards. It's someone who might not have access to other kinds of traditional financial products. And so this is a kind of loan that they can get very easily, that gives them money very quickly, that they can use for, and it's a range of different things. What we hear usually is, oh, it's for emergency expenditures, it's for something like, my car broke down and I need to fix it. But some people also just use it to sort of smooth earnings. So they're a little short now, so they need some extra cash for things like rent, food, medical expenses, and they use these loans to cover those expenses. So then your question is, what would they do if they didn't have it? And we actually there's some research that the Pew Charitable Trust did that shows that people responded that if they didn't have the access to these loans, what they would do is cut back on things like food. So, it may be a loan that doesn't look ideal on its face, but I think that if somebody is choosing between food and using a less than ideal financial product, I think we want them to have access to the money that they need to buy food.
So 12 million Americans end up taking out one of these loans in a given year. It's certainly a tool that people are using to meet a financial crunch, but there are a couple of problems. One is that they think it's going to help them solve their immediate financial problem, and by and large, this isn't the case. Most borrowers think they'll just need one loan for 2 weeks or 1 month to tide them over. The interest on these loans ends up being so high that typically 200, 300, 400% or even more on an annual basis, they can't pay back the loan and keep up with other expenses. So they come back, they roll it over. Many borrowers end up in debt for more than half the year. And so rather than solving a financial problem, it's actually made it a lot worse. Now, when we think about alternatives, we have to recognize that there are 14 states in the District of Columbia where this product is not legal and does not exist. These are states where 90 million people live, and they've managed to get by without this product just fine. They end up having to look toward other options. Some are credit, some aren't. They rely on family and friends and churches and the social safety net, other resources, the same resources that they often end up having to turn to when they're stuck in a debt trap after taking out a number of these payday loans.
And so, Ms. Knight, you did mention that you say that they have no other means to get food or pay rent or water. Would you say that things like government assistance is not a viable option? Would you rather tell someone to get a payday loan instead of government assistance?
I don't think that it's necessarily a one or the other. I think that you would find that a lot of people are using both things. And I'd like to push back on something that Joe said, actually, because he had said that people think they're just taking out a 2-week loan, and actually it winds up being several months before they can pay it back. There's actually been research that shows that the majority of people have a very good idea of how long it's going to take them to pay back the loan. Estimating within a range of a couple of weeks, they pretty much are right on target. So even though it may be the loan is presented as a 2-week product, from one payday to another, the people who go and take out the loans have a complete understanding of their ability to repay it and how long it's going to take. And that's what I think is the fundamental issue here, is that this is a very simple financial product. It's simpler than a credit card. It's simpler than a checking account. You take $100 and you pay a $15 fee on every $100 you take. It's not even an interest rate. It's very simple. I think people understand what the terms of the product are that they're taking out. So if you say that they take this loan and they are mistaken about how long it's going to take them to pay it back, what you're saying is that they don't understand their own financial situation. And that's not something I'm willing to say about people, is I actually think that people are smart enough to know how much money they have. And I think that on the whole, the less money people have, the better they understand how much money they have. If you make 6 figures, $100, you might not know where $100 is. If you make $30,000 a year, you know exactly where every dollar is. So I believe that the people who are more likely to use these types of loans are exactly the kind of people who know their financial situation. And this is what we see. This is what the research bears out, which is that when they go in to take the loan, they know how long it's going to take to pay it back because they know how much money they have.
And do you agree with that, Mr. Valenti?
The one thing I will agree with is low-income people are tremendously adept at managing their money and stretching every dollar and making it count. Where I would disagree is that these types of products often lead so many borrowers to financial ruin, and I think it's maybe they expect that it's not going to, it's going to take them a little while to pay that off. But I don't know that they quite expect the consequences. If you think of auto title loans, a close cousin of payday loans, here in Virginia, 20,000 people see their cars repossessed every year by not being able to pay back their title loans on time. And so, to me, that reflects broader financial distress and taking advantage of people who may think something's going to work out when, by and large, it doesn't, and they end up in a deeper financial hole.
I think the research is actually really mixed on this because there are some studies that show that more payday loans lead to more bankruptcies. There's some studies that say they lead to fewer bankruptcies, and fewer late payments on bills and more financial stability for people who use them. So there's really the research is still kind of mixed on outcomes. Ultimately, to my mind, it comes down to I trust people to make the rational choice. So I'm not in their shoes, and something like government benefits, help from a religious organization, help from their family, these are things that they're looking at and are choosing the payday or the auto title loan. So there may be concerns that, if that other option's not available, they'll turn to these. But when that's available, they're choosing it. So that means there's something there that they want. So maybe it's that they're ashamed to go to their sister and ask for a loan. And that's something that I want to honor. I mean, if somebody's in a position where they say, look, I don't want to admit to my family that I don't have enough money, I think that if somebody wants to come in and fill that need and say, look, I'll make you a loan so that you don't have to admit to your family this thing that you feel shame about. And I'm not saying you should feel shame, but I think that there are people who might be embarrassed about this. They would rather take out this loan than go to their church or their relative and get the money. And I want them to be able to do what they want to do.
So I'm going to push back on the idea that this is the one option that people are really driven to. I think it's really that the marketing for these products is all over the place. You can't drive down Route 1 in Northern Virginia and not see lender after lender after lender. You can't watch TV without being bombarded with advertisements for these products. When the other options that are out there, either they may not have all of the slick marketing, or they may take a little bit more time to access. And these are products that are promising fast cash now with often major consequences later. But even your friend, even your favorite bartender cuts you off at some point when you're tapped out and something that you're going to do is likely to be harmful to you.
I guess I just trust people to make the decisions for themselves. So there's a point where, I hate it when somebody tells me that I don't know what I'm doing, that they need to make a decision I'm a grown-up. And the way, we have certain legal categories for people who are grown-ups who still aren't capable of making their own decisions. And that's a pretty extreme case where there's a whole legal process for having somebody declared incompetent and saying that somebody else has to make decisions for them. Everybody else, we say that, you make the choices for yourself. And I think that we all should be free to make the choices. Nobody's holding a gun to anybody's head and making them take out a payday loan. So if this is something that they want to do, even if it's not smart, I think that there are a lot of things that I do that somebody might not think are smart, but I want to be able to do them. I want to be able to have an unhealthy breakfast when I want to have an unhealthy breakfast. And that's not good for me, but I would feel really angry if somebody came in and told me, you can't have that donut. So I see that as maybe similar. And as for the marketing, the fact that there are so many of them, to me, means that the price is exactly right. So one of the proposals is to put a cap on interest rates, say 36%. There's also widespread agreement. There are things that people disagree with here, but one thing that people agree with is that if you cap interest rates at 36%, you are cutting out this industry. It's going to die. And the reason is because the prices are actually set really well. So if you have lots of these payday lenders, there's competition. If one person's charging $20 for a $100 loan and somebody else opens up and says, I'll charge 19, you'll go to the one that charges 19. So if 15 per 100 is kind of where the market's settled at, that probably means that that's where the profit margin needs to be in order for this to be a viable business. So I actually see the large number of payday lenders as meaning that people are getting better service.
So I'm going to push back on that because if you look at the Pew Charitable Trust, the research that they've done, typically lenders will charge whatever the maximum is in the state where it's permitted. They're not necessarily competing on price. If the state says you can charge 300% APR, 400% APR, that's what they do. Now, that might be because it's hard to be profitable at a lower rate. It might not. And the 36% level is a level that Congress has already decided is the maximum interest rate that should be charged to our service members and their families. And that's a law that's been on the books for close to 10 years now. It was signed into law by President George W. Bush. That we've said this is a product that's problematic for our service members and their families. It threatens their security clearances. It's hard to believe this is a product that is great for the rest of us. Now, I love a good donut, but in terms of making choices, if we go back to the financial crisis, before the crisis, you probably didn't know about the kind of mortgage that your neighbor had, unless your neighbor was bragging about the deal that he or she had. You probably didn't care. As soon as your neighbor was not able to stay current on that mortgage and that home was foreclosed on, it became your business. And we have a public interest in looking at products that have consequences not just for themselves, but for their families, their communities, and ultimately the taxpayer.
One thing is that when you set these interest rates, like if you set a cap at 300 or 400%, the reason that everybody moves up to that is that once you set that, that becomes a ceiling and everybody runs to it. If you don't have that, the market moves to the right level. So you see this over and over again, and this is a different topic, but you see it in executive compensation, where the tax code changed so that you could give people, give executives $1 million without certain tax implications, and all of a sudden a bunch of people got a raise. So once you set something like that, it artificially influences the market so that you're not getting the best price anymore. But I would say you shouldn't have that regulation because it has that effect where it actually raises it. It's kind of like creating an antitrust problem through government regulation. You're price fixing using government regulation.
Well, here's the question I would raise to that is how much is enough? If you go back 200, 300 years, Adam Smith, the founder of modern economics, had said, 5% is just about enough and more than that could be risky. And he argued with people in his time about that. Most states around the founding of this country had interest rate caps for different types of products. About 100 years ago, people saw loan sharking going on and said, I think about 36% should be enough for these types of loans. How much is really enough for people to get the services that they're looking for without opening it up to risk and abuse?
I think that completely depends upon the loan. So one thing here is that you have a high default rate. And the more risk there is, the higher the fee has to be to cover that risk. So, I think that our economic system in the 1770s was wildly different than it is now, or in the 1800s or the 19. It just changes, and you can see the interest rates going up to reflect how our economy has changed. And so, if you put a 36% rate cap on it, it's just not enough to offset both the cost of running these brick and mortar shops and the risk that people are taking on. Now, one solution that we're seeing is that with a lot of developments in financial technology, people are developing other products. They're using things like big data or cell phone data, things where people who might not have a FICO score or might have a poor FICO score can have access to credit through these different ways of getting information about them, and that's great. So what I think would happen is if these products are really bad, I'm not saying that a payday loan is great, it's the thing that you want to use, but that's a great opportunity for someone else to come in with a new innovative product to meet this need. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to happen, I don't see the reason to take away an option that people are willingly using.
I think there's definitely a role for technology here. And there's an enormous role to be able to disrupt this market and make sure that loans are being made that people can afford to pay back and are able to pay it back the first time without having to reborrow or refinance or take out multiple loans. There's an enormous potential there. I think there are some roadblocks when you see companies that are able to make money hand over fist charging triple-digit interest rates when that's a deterrent to startups thinking, we could copy these business models, or we could find something that's really lean and really priced to the consumer's benefit. They're going to go with the easy money over the hard.
I just don't see the evidence that anybody's making money hand over fist because there's this competition in the market. That would suggest that profit margins are fairly slim.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. The first question is from Clark Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan says, isn't it the lender's best interest if the borrower pays back the loan? So why would they make it difficult? Free for all.
So payday loans end up in this gray area where the borrower doesn't pay the loan back right away, which would be the gold standard for responsible lending. The lender gets paid back, the borrower's able to pay it back, everybody's happy. And the borrower doesn't typically default right away either. It's a loan that gets dragged out because you can make a lot of money in interest and fees as that same loan rolls over and over. There was a woman in St. Louis a few years ago who took out a $1,000 loan, had some trouble paying it back. It ballooned into a $40,000 debt. That's how a company is able to make money off this product.
Ms. Knight, did you have any feedback on that question?
I mean, I think that there are, obviously making money off of the fees is the way it works. That's what a loan is. Nobody has a loan where they just, give you the money to borrow and then don't expect anything back. So yeah, they make their money off of fees. And I think that on the whole, they do depend on it being paid back. And so you have these default rates where they're setting the fees based on what they need to cover their expenses with the default rates. The fact that it gets rolled over a few times doesn't really bother me. When you figure the proportion of Americans who keep a balance on their credit card, that's in some ways just kind of rolling over this debt where you've used some money that you can't pay back right away. And the way the credit card companies make money is people not paying it off right away. They don't make it just on the transaction fees. So I see it as a similar model.
Except the fees on this type of product end up being 10 to 20 times as high as the fees and interest rates that you see on a typical credit card.
Okay. Now the next question is from Paula Phelps, and Paula says, how much of the problem is the fact that many people can't get credit cards?
I'd say this, it's a huge part of why people turn to this. I don't think that anybody who has, a $20,000 limit on their credit card and needs $200 is going to go get a payday loan. And there is some innovation in this space where there are people, as I said, there are some companies who are looking at ways to make credit available to people who might not qualify under more traditional measures where they're able to capture different kinds of measurements of credit worthiness. So, we may see the need go down as there are other products available.
Right, I think credit cards are one option that people may not have. It may also be, in some cases, that whatever they're looking to purchase, whatever problem they're trying to solve, involves cash. And cash advances on credit cards can also be pretty expensive, as opposed to being able to swipe your card and get the things that you need. I think the other problem here is this really is something that markets itself as fast cash and quick approval when the consequences are much more severe down the line.
And now it's time for Answer This, where each guest asks a question directly to the other. Who would like to go first?
Would you like to go first?
So I had kind of asked before what interest rate is appropriate for certain types of products. And I guess I'll ask a variation of that, which is, if regulation isn't necessary for this particular market, where is it necessary when we're looking at consumer financial products?
That's a very broad question. I think that there are probably some areas where regulation is necessary. And I'm not saying that regulation is not necessary at all for payday lending. I'm saying that the kind of regulation that's been proposed by the CFPB, which, if it's implemented, will get rid of payday lending, is too much regulation and is just inappropriate for the kind of product. If you have an agency that can't can't bar a certain product from existing. The CFPB does not have the authority to write a law that says you can't do payday lending anymore. Doing it by creating a regulation that effectively wipes it out seems to me taking too much power onto itself. It's something that would require an act of Congress or the act of the state legislatures to do. This agency is doing on its own strikes me as not quite kosher.
Could I respond to that?
Yes.
So I think it's not the CFPB is going to ban this entirely. If you look at some of the industry studies and the government analyses that are out there, yes, a portion of this market's going to be wiped out. Maybe it's 2/3 of the market. It's wiping out, in particular, the loans that get rolled over time and time again and that cause the most consumer harm. And it's dealing with practices where lenders keep dipping into your bank account repeatedly to try to take out money to pay back the loan, whether paying it back is your highest priority at that moment in time or not. So it's really going after a handful of the worst practices. I agree that I don't think the CFPB has the authority to actually get rid of this product in its entirety.
And Ms. Knight, what is your question for Mr. Valenti?
Again, I think that we may have discussed this in some ways, but if people are choosing this as what they feel is the best option of, they have a financial need, There are different options available to them, and they choose this one. Can you explain why they shouldn't be able to have the thing they want? And second, what they're going to do if this isn't available, where people will go?
So it's a question of when the individual harm also contributes to broader public harm. We see this with smoking, for example. Now, you can still smoke typically in your own home, provided that you own your own home. Maybe you can too if your landlord lets you. But we've decided that people smoking around children, people smoking in cars with their kids, people smoking in all different types of areas and situations is probably not great for them, and it may incur some public health costs and some taxpayer costs down the line, but it's also really not good for their families and communities. And in fact, we've seen entire neighborhoods and cities and counties that have looked to regulate this industry the way it regulates porn establishments, the way it regulates other types of businesses that are just not welcome because there are so many of them, and they really are preying on a lot of the most vulnerable folks in our community. In terms of alternatives, I think it's a combination of credit and non-credit. And it's making sure that we have a good safety net. It's making sure that we have rising wages in this country. We've seen productivity rise dramatically in the past 30 years, but many workers haven't seen it in their paychecks. If we adjusted the minimum wage for inflation for what it was in the late 60s, it would be $11, $12 today. On $7, $8 an hour, people find it really hard to get by. They tap into these products to try to bridge a gap, and they end up in an even deeper financial hole.
And it's now time for We Agree, where each guest names something the other said that he or she agrees with. Who would like to start?
I think that you had said that these are not the best options for people, that sometimes this is not a smart move for someone. And I agree. I don't think that a payday loan is a smart move for everybody. I think that there are people who get themselves into trouble with it, just like they get themselves in trouble with a lot of different things, because some people are just going to be dumb.
I would agree that there's a pretty high bar before you take something off the shelf. Now, we haven't always used the same bar for financial products that we do for other things. Senator Elizabeth Warren often talks about if 1 in 5 toasters exploded, we would take them off the market. These are loans that have similarly bad odds. And so that's why I would argue that it takes reform. But I don't think that you can take things off the shelves without a really serious case for doing so.
Very pleased. Throughout this debate, we found something that we each agree on. And that's all the time we have for today. We'd like to thank Thaya Brook Knight of the Cato Institute and Joe Valenti of the Center for American Progress for joining us to discuss this issue. And thank you for watching Scholars Mate. I'm Denisha Richard. We'll see you next time.